because of course you came to hear from our fantastic speakers. I have a privilege to introduce them one by one. But if you allow me, I will start with the panelists and then I will ask our keynote to take the floor. Ana Caterina Mendes, she's the Vice President of the S&D Group in the European Parliament, member of SEDE committee, so responsible very much for the questions of security and defense, but also of the LIBE committee, which I think makes her a fantastic, perfect speaker for today, because it is a question which she's trying to deal on a daily basis. How do we make the world more secure, but also more democratic without forgetting about that in the course of politics? Next to her, Katrin Sangster. She is the member of the Scottish Policy Forum, but also she is the national manager of the Fabian Society for Scotland. She's maybe the first time in this house, but definitely not new to FABs. I think a couple of years ago we discovered so many different things, not only about Brexit, but also about how democracy can empower people by looking at 20 years of devolution and what it meant for Scotland and for the United Kingdom. So if you don't trust my word, you can definitely look it online. The publication is still there, and I invite you to do so because some of the lessons remain and persist to be the same. And next to her, Rosa Crawford, who is the head of international at the Trade Union Congress. Today coming from the UK, but not a novice to Brussels at all. She used to work in ETUI, so trade unions heart, but also pro-European heart. Welcome back, Rosa. We hope for many happy returns. And with that, what's left for me is to introduce the keynote. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Caroline Reid, Deputy Ambassador, who is now going to open officially this event and share with us some of the remarks, after which we will be able to take a couple of questions. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anya, and thank you all of you for inviting me here this evening. I was going to talk a little bit about how the government's relationship with the EU has evolved over the last year and a bit about where we go from here. I think it's fair to say that the government has focused on resetting the relationship between the UK and the EU over the last year, and this started from the Prime Minister's first day in office, where he spoke to President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, on his very first day. Within 2 weeks of being in office, he had hosted almost all the leaders from across Europe writ large as part of the European Political Community Summit at Blenheim. And this high-level leadership of resetting the relationship has been evident with ministers from across the spectrum of UK issues. So led by the Minister for Cabinet Office, Nick Thomas-Symonds, who regularly speaks with, meets with, exchange texts with Commissioner Šefčovič on UK-EU issues, but also at many levels at Cabinet. For example, the Chancellor has been here to speak to Eurogroup. The Foreign Secretary has been to an EU Foreign Affairs Council. We have had visits from Secretaries of State of Trade and Business, Secretaries of State of Science, Innovation and Technology, Northern Ireland, and more too. So we have had lots of ministerial visits here in Brussels, which I think shows the strength of the relationship. We've also seen too lots of commissioners come to the UK, and in fact last week Commissioner McGrath was in the UK meeting many ministers. So lots of work on the relationships. But we've also had lots of work on the agreements. Just last month, we saw the historic agreement on Gibraltar, bringing stability and prosperity to Gibraltar, but also the wider region. And as you mentioned, Anya, we had on May the 19th, the first UK-EU summit, which I think is a real turning point in the relationship. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the summit outcomes and what it means. So I think there's two key issues that came out the summit. First is on substance, which I'll come to in a minute, but second is on tone, and I think tone was really important. This was a leader-level summit, so the Prime Minister, he met with Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the Commission, as well as the President of the European Council. So it was the three of them in the leader-level summit, the first time we have had a UK-EU summit. And the tone was incredibly positive. Ursula von der Leyen described the summit as historic and turning the page, and it was very future-looking and set forward the new strategic partnership between the UK and the EU, which then brings me to the substance. There are 3 documents that came out of the summit. The joint statement, which sets out how the relationship between the UK and the EU is going to work, but it also discussed some of the global issues and some of the areas of shared values. There was the common understanding, which is essentially between the UK and the EU, and is essentially a roadmap of the work that we need to undertake over the coming months and years. And then thirdly, there was a security and defence partnership, which was agreed on May the 19th. So across those 3 documents, there were 4 key themes: security and defence, justice, home affairs and migration, economic prosperity, and citizens. And I'll just cover a bit on each of those. On security and defence, there was an agreement for broad-based cooperation on issues ranging from Ukraine to hybrid threats to infrastructure resilience, so across the whole spectrum of issues in the security space. There was also an agreement to work together on wider security issues, so for example, working on health security, and going further than that, working on issues such as international development and humanitarian cooperation. And the security and defence partnership was important in and of itself, but it also opens the way for an agreement for the UK to participate in the EU's 150 billion loan SAFE programme. So that will be the next stage of the discussions. On justice and home affairs, there was lots of issues that were agreed to work on. For example, how to improve data sharing, for example, facial recognition, biometric data, how we can get our drugs agencies to collaborate better together, how we can combat visa fraud together, but also how we can work on migration together, including working on upstream migration. There was also lots in the economic space. So there's an agreement to take forward an SPS agreement, an agri-food agreement, really important given there's £45 billion worth of imports and £15 billion worth of exports. Having an SPS agreement will reduce red tape, reduce barriers, ease trade between the UK and the EU, and also ease trade across the Irish Seas. There was an agreement to work on energy cooperation. This was putting on a stable footing the energy chapter of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, but also exploring if the UK should join the internal energy market, working towards more efficient electricity trading, ultimately benefiting consumers, but also benefiting our progress towards net zero. We also, in the energy space, agreed to work together on issues such as renewables, so collaborating on how we can work together on the future-facing issues of energy too. We agreed that we would work towards linking our emissions trading schemes, important in its own right as we each look to decarbonise at the least cost approach. So having deeper carbon markets, more liquid carbon markets is really beneficial, but also important as we look to the future regulations, particularly with the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism coming into place. Having linked emissions trading schemes will prevent future barriers. There was an agreement around fish, so an agreement for a 12-year fishing deal, which brings stability and transparency both to fisher people and people working in the wider industry. And there was also an agreement on steel to restore our historic quotas on steel to help the steel industry. So finally, the last part of the agreements was around citizens, very important part of the agreement. Here there was an agreement to work together on a youth experience scheme, giving opportunities for youth in both the EU and the UK to work, to travel, to study in each other's countries, important for those people, but also for cultural links in the future. And an agreement to look at how we can rejoin Erasmus+, so enabling exchange between students, university students. So all of this, I think, is a very forward-looking and positive strategic partnership that we're looking to take forward. Already we're seeing work between ourselves and the EU on how we can take forward this partnership. That work, as you'll be glad to know, has started already. And we have agreed that we will have annual summits. So we will take forward this progress on an annual basis. So it's not just about this year, it's about the future too. So I look forward to the discussion. I think we've got a positive path to be discussing, and I look forward to taking any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. You've ended up on a very much people's at the center, which was one of the messages of the summit, and very optimistic, I have to say, diplomatically optimistic note. I promise that I will take a couple of questions if there are any questions to Caroline, who will need to leave us just briefly. So are there any volunteers to break the ice? I think it's the label. Yes, Maggie. If you could say also who you are, that would be helpful.
Hi, Maggie Coulthard. I worked in the European Parliament for 25 years or so, but I'm now retired. But you mentioned international development, and international development has taken such a battering that I really wanted to ask what international development is left, really, and what it will focus on.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maggie, for paving the way. Now I see more questions.
Thank you. Clemens Kober, German Chambers of Commerce. Just a quick question, moving from international aid to international trade. I would be interested in hearing in how far you are coordinating with the European Union to respond to the US tariffs. Thank you.
Thank you. I am keen and ready to take still two, and the left side of the audience hasn't been very active just yet, just saying. It's a one. Yes, Nicoletta.
Hi, Nicoletta Birozzi. I'm the head of the EU program at the Institute for International Affairs in Rome. And I wanted to ask you if you can tell us a bit more about the UK expectations when it comes to the security and defense partnership, and in particular the participation to the SAFE mechanism or other prospects in terms of cooperation in the defense field. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think with the three questions, so broad as they are, they give a lot of space for the answer.
So taking each of those, so on international development, what was agreed at the summit in the Common Understanding was that we would cooperate on international development issues, something that we actually haven't been doing in a structured way up till now. So we will have an international development dialogue. I think this is all the more important at the time where international aid budgets are constrained. We need to make sure that every euro that is being spent on international aid has the impact that we want it to do. And as we're looking at the whole international system on aid, making sure that we do that in a coordinated way becomes all the more important. On EU-US trade, we're obviously watching that with interest because it has significant impacts globally and definitely has impacts across the UK. So we will take a lot of interest in those discussions. On expectations for the SAFE agreement and what does the security partnership do? As I mentioned, it's the security and defence partnership and what was agreed in the Common Understanding is really broad about our defence, security, diplomatic, development cooperation. So we will look to work across a whole broad range of issues. On SAFE specifically, the white paper that was probably about 2 months ago here set out that you needed a security and defence partnership before the door is open to be able to participate in SAFE. So having the security and defence partnership is the first step towards that. Now we need to negotiate how or when the UK would participate in such a scheme, but those conversations will be ongoing.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you very much for opening this first EU-UK forum in this house. We feel very humbled and very privileged. And thank you for also setting us for a great challenge, because you said, you know, the clock is ticking. So now there's a question for a politician on the panel. The clock is ticking. I think much has been said about that after the... Thank you very much, Caroline. I think applause is absolutely in order. So we ended up on an optimistic note, and I would like to ask you, as the progressive inside of the European Parliament, with as many challenges as Caroline has listed, how optimistic are we following the 19th of May, and how much do we look at this new partnership not only as a necessity, which so many underline, but as not only pragmatic, but a choice that may set us for a better future here in Europe?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. And thank you very much for your explanation, which helped me a lot for my, my speech. But I am an optimistic. And I feel that after the summit in May, we should be optimists and we should be pragmatic, but also we need to work a lot to have, to improve the agreements, and especially to have again a good relation with the UK and European Union. And it's not only defense, speaking about defense or agreements in defense, because we have Ukraine and we should work on it, but we have Middle East and we should work on it, and what is happening in Gaza need our voices and our strong voices, UK and EU, but also it's a matter of defending our democracies. And I think that we really need to have this cooperation. For me, it was a sad day when we were the Brexit, because I grew up with the European Union and European Union with the UK. So I'm really optimistic. First, on the defense agreements, on the matters of Ukraine or Middle East, but also on partnership about youth, and you spoke about this. The Commissioner for Youth fight a lot to have again Erasmus, for instance, the Erasmus program for young people from UK, and I think we need this because we need the mobility, and we grow up, our generation grow up with these programs around, because they make us to have the conscience of the citizenship of Europe, to be European, but also the conscience of having democratic values. And we need this, really, we really need this. And fighting for our defense on the wars that we have already, but also fighting for our democracies is also, and that's why it's so important to have the agreements with the UK, is about migrants. And we cannot speak about migration with the eyes of of the far right. We need to look to the migrants with the eyes of progressive family, and progressive family means include integration and respect for the difference. And I think that could be very, very helpful for the European Union and for the building of bridges that we need to build, to have a cooperation on migrant issue also, because we have a long story, as many of our countries has, but UK was always a model of society of inclusion and integration, and I think that this is for me one of the main issues of this new relation with the UK and European Union, especially because we are talking about democracy. And today, when we speak about democracy, we speak about the surveillance of our common project in Europe. And that's why I feel very happy to hear you, because you are optimistic, but I feel that we can have a new path to build in the relations between UK and EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna Katarina. Rosa, you have been working on the EU-UK relationship before Brexit, just after Brexit, during Brexit, and now in the new chapter. Anna Katarina spoke a lot about what's important when it comes to the different policy areas, but of course you have been also working on different topics that Caroline mentioned when it comes to socioeconomic dimension and the hopes and troubles in there. So how do you see this opening in this in the light of your expertise and your daily work? Because there are certainly lots of reasons for optimism, but also a lot of concerns, aren't there?
Yeah, well, I think this is an optimistic era, definitely from the one that we had under the previous government. Thank you very much for inviting and holding this event also to say, and I think hopefully this is the first of many interactions. Really great to hear Caroline's words, and just to say thanks for the engagement we've had from the UK government in this reset, and prioritising this closer relationship with the EU has been so welcome from the trade union perspective in the UK and also across the EU. people might know we are also part of the European trade union family, the ETUC. Membership is not conditional on being a member of the EU, and in fact it's been more important than ever that we're a member of the ETUC, because that way we also have engagement with the European Commission as well as with the UK government. So we have a joint position around our priorities in terms of the UK-EU reset. And we are optimistic after seeing the outcomes of the summit. I think it was a really important step forward. I think the agreement around SPS sets a really important precedent in terms of saying the UK is willing to follow EU standards, and these can be underpinned by the European Court of Justice. That was turned into such a toxic, symbolic issue by the previous government for a reason that was really all about politics and nothing to do with people's actual concerns on the ground. And so for us, it's a really important step forward that we've got that agreement in the outcomes of the UK-EU summit. For us, what we need for workers on the ground, and coming to that really important point that you've raised about concerns of workers that are being exploited really worryingly by the far right. In the UK, we have elections coming up next year in Wales, where it looks like far-right parties, in particular Reform, are making huge gains as a result of workers' concerns in communities such as those around Port Talbot in the steel industry. So for what workers in those communities need to see is investment and good jobs coming to those communities and being supported. So it's really important we've got the agreement on SPS. We want to see agreements that remove barriers to trade in other sectors, such as chemicals and pharmaceuticals, where there's also been very damaging barriers. The emissions trading scheme linkage is really important for communities in steel, as well as other industrial sectors that might be hit by those carbon border tariffs. But we do need to see more measures done to support those steel industries as well. But I think that's a really important area where the UK and EU need to cooperate. In terms of what workers also need to see, we need to see an improvement in rights protection. It's been hugely welcome in the UK that we've had a huge step forward with the Employment Rights Bill, which obviously trade unions worked with the Labour Party when in opposition, and now in government we're working with them. People may know, but this is a huge step forward in terms of workers' rights, day one rights, in terms of sick pay, holiday pay, a whole range of areas, which has been a hugely welcome development. But there are protections that have come in terms of employment rights in the EU that the UK workers aren't yet covered by. So things like rights for platform workers, certain rights around data in terms of the AI Act, rights around pay transparency, all these are improvements that have come in since 2020. Obviously with the UK agreement, we had UK-EU agreement, we do have the level playing field provisions, which are historic and groundbreaking because they hold both parties to respecting rights to the level they were at in December 2020, but there's no obligation for the UK to keep up with the EU standards where there are improvements. And obviously where the UK makes improvements, hopefully the EU is inspired to follow. But certainly as trade unions, we'd want to see that as an area where there could be closer cooperation and building on rights. And it's really good that we are having a really good engagement with the UK government on that and the Make Work Pay agenda. And then also just to pick up on that point around mobility, for us it's really important that we increase the opportunity for UK workers to work in the EU and EU workers to work in the UK, because we've seen a huge rise in exploitation with EU workers on short-term visas in the UK. If they lose their legal status, they are absolutely exploitable, and we want to make sure there are decent job opportunities for workers in the EU as well as vice versa. So we again see the youth experience scheme as a really important first step, but we do want to go further. So just to say that as unions, we're working very closely with businesses in the UK. We don't always share the same platform with them on everything, but on this, there's a really important consensus. There's a group called the Domestic Advisory Group in the UK and EU, which brings together unions, employers and civil society. You'll hear from my colleague Tanya Butzek that sits on the EU side of the Domestic Advisory Group, but we've been working very, very closely, and we met about 3 weeks ago in London, and we released a joint statement, and it came to consensus that we really welcomed all those outcomes as an important first step for removing barriers to trade, removing barriers for workers to work in each other's countries, on energy and around defence, which I should say from a trade union point of view is also very welcome because there's very good jobs in the defence industry that we want to support. But time is of the essence, as you say, and as was mentioned. So the group's joint statement said we really look forward to rapid development and engagement with trade unions, business and civil society, which, as I say, has been very positive so far. But as we get into the detail, we need that engagement too, to make sure that we start to show results and can prove results to workers on the ground who, as I say, are having their concerns really exploited by the far right. So we really look forward to working with you all on this agenda, which I think is so important and a really positive space to be in now.
Thanks very much, Rosa. I hear very much a call for action. So what I've heard so far from the speakers is Caroline spoke about the transformational nature of the agreement, also talking about the energy union and how we deal with the challenges that evolve around us. Anna Katerina spoke about the values-based partnership, speaking about democracy. Now, Rosa, you used the word inspirational, and you definitely emphasized that the time is ticking. But evidently, this type of an agreement can be felt very differently in the different places. And I'm so happy to have Catherine with us because we've discussed the Scottish position on Brexit and all the drama that evolved with that in the context of democracy. So some of the aspects that we've already touched upon the conversation. And Catherine, I'm wondering how, from your perspective, how does this agreement is a beacon of hope indeed, and what can we do to follow up on Rosa's not to disappoint the hopes that have been entrusted in us with that?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, firstly, absolutely hugely positive and night and day from where we were under a Tory government. So, I mean, I think it would be safe to say that the last at least 15 years of our relationship with the EU was a negative one. It was only going one way, and that was downward. And we now have it going upward. We now have a very, positive relationship. Well, a tentative positive relationship, but absolutely going in the right direction. The other thing I would say, and speaking from a Scottish perspective, progressives, pro-Europeans, which obviously everyone in this room is, must learn the lesson from the Brexiteers and the nationalists in Scotland. We cannot fight the same arguments over and over again, and we cannot expect to just keep having referendums until we get the answer that we want. Unfortunately, we have left the EU, and we must interact with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. What we've seen, and every panellist has said the same, there are shared interests, very clear shared interests in defence, in workers' rights, challenging climate change, and those are the things that we can work together on. Macron came to the House of Lords last week, and I don't know if anyone has seen what he'd said, but he made a very interesting point about the fact that the EU has been seen as a regulator, and as we're under threat with big corporations and billionaires, Google, Amazon, Meta, actually we need to start innovating to make sure that we can control those and ensure that workers aren't being exploited. I'll reflect on Scotland for a bit, because I worked with FEPS 5 years ago on a project, and when I was kindly asked to come today, I went back and revisited what we'd said 5 years ago. And what I would say is everything has changed, but nothing has changed. The world is a more insecure place, and we know that, and we must build alliances with our progressive allies. We have aggression from Russia, but actually the issues that we are all grappling with, and in the UK and in Scotland, the division between yes and no, leave, remain, stays with us. Every issue is seen through that prism. What we've seen with Keir and the summit is beginning to unpick that, beginning to take that apart. But it still exists. And why does it still exist? Well, we've had 15 years of stagnation, 15 years of dropping living standards, wages not going up, and people are looking for easy answers to complex solutions, and that's still, that is still there. In Scotland, we had, when we asked the question, now this is 5 years ago, but when we asked the question, what do you think the biggest threat to Scotland's future is? People thought that was Brexit. Overwhelmingly, people thought that was Brexit. 46% of people in Scotland felt they were European. So in terms of us going into election, because our election is 10 months away, and I'm a candidate and I'm busy knocking doors at the moment, it is hugely helpful that we can start to tell a really positive story about what we can do with our with our EU partners, and we can tell a progressive story. But as I said, the solutions are the same. The solutions that we identified in our publication are still the same. We need a reformed UK. In 2021, Gordon Brown described the UK as a dysfunctional state. And I like to think we are beginning to change that. We need a strengthened UK, we need a reformed UK, and we need a UK that is pro-devolution, patriotic, but incredibly comfortable with the multiple identities that exist within it. And that's where we need to get to. And we need a strengthened Scotland. You know, we need a Scotland that is comfortable with where powers sit. To come back to Keir and what he's done, I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but probably no PM has had to pivot quite so much to international affairs as he has done, and that is where he's the most, I think he's the strongest on, and he's the most positive on. In terms of Scotland, we need, how we are going to, and I very much hope we do win, how we're going to win in 2026 is to ensure that the framing of the debate in Scotland is how we use the powers of the Scottish Parliament to make people's lives better. If we keep the nationalists on that agenda, we will win. If we allow them to turn it into another referendum of whether Scotland should be independent, of whether we can go back into the EU, we will lose. So that's a challenge for us. And events like this are hugely helpful in me hearing the ideas of our colleagues and how we move forward. And I'll just make one other point, that defending democracy is, you know, absolutely the business that we're in at the moment with populism and reform.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I think that provides a huge agenda for a very hard work, and I think it's been said very much in this panel that it will take perseverance, but it also will take a good mix of idealistic but also pragmatic approach. I think what comes very strongly is the top priorities, and tomorrow at the closed-door seminar we will be talking about the issues of trade, environment and energy, as well as democracy. Democracy is not at the end, it's just our grand finale, I would say, because I think it did come through socioeconomic empowerment to the regional devolution issues and the European level, how people feel indeed, how they can influence their own lives and the reality that they live in. But you've ended up with saying very nice words about the Labour government and what Labour government has done. So it's only fair that I will give the floor for the first reaction to Joe Dancy, who is the Executive Director of Communications of the Labour Party. Joe, the floor is yours. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here talking on behalf of the Labour Party rather than the British government. You've had the Deputy Ambassador doing that already, but look, when we think about, in terms of, you know, come to this question, I look at this point about what can we deliver which is long-lasting, strong and resilient, because that has to be the future of how we have this relationship, which we are delighted that the Prime Minister are working together with our European allies has helped to bring a reset to. And coming to the fundamentals of what has just been said, when we had the break of Brexit and how we go forward, I think the way I look at it is in terms of, if we want to change the fundamentals of how people view the relationship into the future and have something resilient, then we need to change the fundamentals of their lives themselves. And as Rosa said, and the Deputy Ambassador set out, the fundamentals of this deal is about the interdependency with our allies in Europe. It has been based on the fundamentally and what the Labour government is working hard to implement in Britain, around the need to bring back personal prosperity that is felt in people's pockets, to take on the challenges of the cost of living. That has risen for different reasons, but we can see from the conflict in Ukraine the importance of these provisions that we have on energy, so that Britain, which once exported coal and oil around Europe, can be a leader in terms of its renewable exports. That goes for Scotland, the North Sea, but across the country as well. We see it with steel, as Rose said. Vitally important. creating jobs across the whole United Kingdom, so that every region and nation benefits. And then fundamentally also in the collaboration in defence, where Britain does have a lead, and working, as we saw in the last week, with President Macron's visit to the United Kingdom. But the common interest that our continent shares, both within our own backyard, but also further afield as well, given uncertainties, whether that is in the Eastern Hemisphere or the Western Hemisphere. That is where we see where progressives should be arguing for collaboration and defending our strategic partnerships, because I think we should go back. Whilst there are these positive movements, to really create this bulwark against a populist right, whether that is in the United Kingdom, across Europe, we need to look, certainly from the United Kingdom's perspective, from how this came about in the first place. And these things are anecdotal, but I will go back to a town called Stockton in the northeast of England, in a region called Teesside, which is known for chemicals, for steel. It was the port that helped export coal from the Durham coalfield around the UK and beyond. But it has suffered decades of deindustrialisation. It hurt more from Conservative Party austerity in the 6 years up to the run-up to the referendum. So when I went there in June 2016, weeks ahead of the referendum, to campaign and speak to people there, this might have been a town which gave birth to the public railway 200 years ago this year, but it is also a town with the greatest life expectancy gap in England. You are 18 years more likely you will die at 64 on average in where the town high street is, compared to the richer suburbs. And so when people in that region voted by a significant majority to leave, what they were saying on the high street to me and others was not take back control, as Nigel Farage would have you say, or Boris Johnson. What they actually were saying was things can't get worse than this. And so many of them rolled the dice and thought that it was worth trying to see if Brexit would deliver something different. Now, actually, when you look at the British election last year, I was out again on the streets of Stockton, and when you speak to people, many of the leavers who you spoke to, they said, well, look, things haven't worked out as we hoped they would. They could see that many of the promises were, whether they'd been lied to or just were unable to deliver from a series of incompetent governments, frankly. But they weren't asking, as Catherine, rightly points out, to rejoin and have a fourth election on this subject. Well, they actually were doing what chimed was ultimately where Keir Starmer and the Labour Party's offer was to try and help make Brexit work. And I think what we are pleased about, as one of the 3 trade deals that the Prime Minister has signed, first with the EU, with India, with the United States, is that these movements is actually trying to put money back in people's pockets, so they actually feel the prosperity, so that they are not led through the poverty and through lack of optimism that places like towns like Stockton or the Northeast or places in Scotland can feel, but actually they see a difference in their lives, and that is why we have to come to the fundamentals of deals like this, which is absolutely focused on security, whether that's in your personal pocket, have your personal economic security or national security. And I'll just quote the Prime Minister, this is the difference that the Labour government the new path that the Labour government has taken, re-engaging with our international allies, is, as he says about this deal, facing out into the world again in the great traditions of this nation. We're building relationships because that is what independent and sovereign nations do. And I hope that a confident Britain that's enthusiastic to rejoin its colleagues again is what we will see, both for the relationship with the European Union, but also for people in the UK as well.
Thank you very much, Joe. I think that adds on how much of a responsibility one has taking those issues. It's not just the enthusiasm after 19th of May, but there's a lot of responsibility for everyone who picks up any item of the conversation, because indeed we are talking about the new chapter. We are talking about something that should be, I think, used. All of you used this word, long-lasting and resilient to the anti-democratic and other aspects that are there, and that works not only for those who discuss those issues, but works actually, and it's to be felt among the populations. Now, this is supposed to be a participatory debate, so I would like to ask those colleagues who are in here to raise hands, as also my colleagues are following those who are following us online. So I will be informed, shall there be anyone who is willing to ask the question, we will try to translate them, and I will start from walking from the back.
Oh, hi there. It's a question for Rosa. How do you square the circle of trade unions wanting a closer relationship with Europe when it was Labour's biggest affiliated union, Unite, who was supportive of leaving the EU? And there's the fact that Keir Starmer has to compete with potentially a new party to the left of him, run by Corbyn. So is the era of Corbyn's Euroscepticism dead on the left? Thanks.
Could you say who you are?
Oh, I'm Blaise Bakish. I'm a journalist working for the Parliament magazine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would suggest that we take 3 or 4, come back to the panel, and then we get the conversation going. I'm trying to encourage some more participation if I only can. I couldn't encourage people to move forward, but maybe at least for taking the floor, I'll be more successful. Yes, Sidonia.
Hello, hi. I'm Sidonia Wetzig from the EU office of the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung. And as we've been discussing, we want a more resilient and a more sustainable partnership between the EU and the UK. I'm wondering, also with view of that at the moment, the conditions are favorable on the EU side, also on the UK side, and also because we have international geopolitical pressure for both partners to work together. But what could be very concrete milestones in setting up and really making sure that, well, voters and citizens see it really worthwhile pursuing this partnership, even though it can be quite cumbersome to get all the complexity of the issues addressed. So concrete milestones, where would you see those?
Richard.
Thank you. My question is, are Labour's red lines of not rejoining even the single market and the customs union not a little bit too rigid as we move forward, looking perhaps beyond the next election? Single market meant common rules, so any product made in Britain could be sold without further ado anywhere else in the European Union, because it was legal, made to the same standards, rules, regulations, didn't need any further conformity testing or anything. Customs union, if you're outside the customs union, even with 0 tariffs, your goods are subject to verification on the rules of origin to check they are actually British products, what proportion, etc. Red tape, form filling, bureaucracy. Those are the 2 big barriers to exports to our main export market and our main supply chain markets. It works both ways, hindering economic growth, which would otherwise be higher. Does Labour not need to readdress that? Especially if you look at the underlying trend of public opinion, where last month, if you take away the don't knows, it was 64%, 64.5% who said Brexit was a mistake. So probably the public, because that trend is slowly going, but very steadily upwards, very regularly, very steady, unlike most opinion polls, that should make it easier in due course for the government to soften its red lines.
I will take the last question and I will return to the panel.
Hello, my name's Matt Harries. I work for the Labour Movement for Europe in the UK. Thanks very much for a really interesting panel. My question is for Anna Katarina, if I may. as Brits, we spend a lot of time talking about amongst ourselves about what we think we should ask the EU for and what we want from the EU. But obviously, there's two sides to all of these discussions. And I wondered, now that the initial work of improving the tone of the relationship and starting to break down some barriers is underway, what are your top 3 priorities of what you think EU states want from the UK? Because I think it would be a shame if we let a dynamic start up that this is just about the UK asking for the EU for stuff, because I personally don't think that's true.
Okay, so very easy questions. Just to recap, we have the question of the trade union's position. We have the question of the trade relations and single market. We have the question of deliverables, what concretely shall come up after the big announcement. And we also have a question of how it is meant to be legitimized with the feelings of the European, what the Europeans are expecting. So Brexit after Brexit, not only in the UK context. Now, very easy, I suppose. Now, Catherine, shall we start with you, perhaps?
Which one do you want me to go for?
You can choose, like that you don't risk much. The other panelists will be pinned down by me that they will have to address the remaining questions.
Right. Okay. I'll give a bit of a overview. I think in terms of the red lines, the job is to convince the public that I think first of all, and we'll get some answer on that. I mean, first of all, we need to align ourselves as closely with Europe as we possibly can. Then there needs to be, if the objective is to go back into single market or the customs union, then it's actually winning that argument with the public. But it's not just winning the argument with the public, it's winning, and it comes back to what Europe wants from us. It's also winning the argument with Europe. They need to want us back, and they need to think of us as a reliable ally, and not someone that's a country that's going to flip flop out of the EU. So it's not to say that as I said in my opening remarks, it's not. I mean, most of us in this room would agree that we are pro-European and we were devastated by Brexit, but it's not really a decision for us to make. It's a decision for the public, and then it's a decision for Europe to feel confident. And I think we are a long way away from where we need to be on that. I'll touch on what would be concrete, and I think I'll say, I'll give a political answer, because I've, as most people in Scottish Labour, have lived in Hamilton for a by-election and spent many weeks there. And the experience there, and we won. For people who don't know, it was a fantastic win for us. We worked very, very hard to get that over the line. But the experience was people feeling empowered to come to doors and say there are too many migrants in the UK. Now, I have never heard that on a doorstep before in Scotland. And it was a sobering experience. And if we don't want reform to gain any hold either in Scotland or in the UK, we have to solve the problem of illegal migrants. And that's why the tentative deal this week is really, really fantastic. We have to get that sorted. We have to get the numbers of illegal migrants down coming into the UK. And I think if the UK saw that as the way the EU is prepared to work for us, that would feel very concrete to us, but it would also be hugely beneficial when we're trying to, we're trying to counteract the rise of the right in the UK and in Scotland. And I think the other thing I would say, to the sort of the rise of populism on both sides of the left of the right, I think actually the world is not Twitter, and it is not an MP's inbox, although sometimes we lose sight of that. People want institutions to cooperate. Right? They want Holyrood to work with Westminster and Westminster to work with the EU. They tell us that when we poll them. And what they also understand understand is the divisions of the referendum, whether it was in Scotland or whether it was in the UK. We cannot go through that again. So they are asking us to find these solutions, and we need to and that's what we need to deliver on.
Rosa, you had quite a provocative question to yourselves, and though I said I will give the panelists a liberty to choose, definitely that's the topic I would invite you to consider, as also to pick up perhaps on deliverables, because you were very strong in the areas already, but let's say in a one-year perspective, like when there is the new summit, what should be achieved until then? We'd love to hear from you.
Oh, thanks for those questions. Always good to have lots of engagement. But just to say, TUC is not officially linked with the Labour Party. A number of our affiliates are officially linked with the Labour Party, including Unite that was mentioned, but a number of them aren't. Our third largest affiliate, the National Education Union, which has almost 1 million members, is not affiliated to the Labour Party, for example. I certainly don't speak for them. Maybe Joe has some thoughts and reflections, but I certainly couldn't and won't speak for the Labour Party, as I say, because we're not officially linked. But just to note that Unite took officially a position to support Remain in the referendum, as almost all the trade unions did. There were only 2 trade unions, the Bakers and RMT, that supported Leave. So that was a unified position amongst the overwhelming majority of trade unions that we supported Remain, and hopefully people who knew the UK context knew that TUC was a very vocal part of the Remain campaign. Then once the Brexit vote had happened, we then said we need a deal where workers do not suffer the consequences, and Unite was very much behind that, as were all our affiliated trade unions. Now our position is, and was agreed at our Congress last year, that we really want to engage with this reset and get the best possible deal for workers by, as I said, removing barriers to trade in as many sectors as possible, making sure workers in the UK don't fall behind in terms of workers' rights, increasing opportunities for mobility, making sure our sectors like steel don't get hit by the carbon border tariff. So that's a unified trade union position that you can see. So I think that's a really important principle to hold on to, and all our trade unions are behind. When it comes to the red lines, obviously that's a decision that got made by the Labour Party and then the government. Within that, at least for us, it's really welcome that we have been able to have an important step forward in terms of the reset and agreeing that we can remove barriers to trade in sectors like the SPS, but we do want to go further to other sectors like chemicals, pharmaceuticals. That would already reduce a lot of the threats to kind of rights and working conditions and pay that sectors like chemicals, pharmaceuticals and others are facing. So that would already be a big improvement. But agree absolutely with the kind of, I think the intentional intimation behind the question. Our General Secretary has said the government should be really ambitious, and the red lines shouldn't stop that ambition. And really, a lot of options should remain on the table, and he's talked about a customs union being something that the UK government should think about with the EU. There are many ways you could think about it, and could it be linked with the defence agreement in some ways to think about reducing tariffs by having some kind of alignment in terms of the components in the defence sector? That's one way of thinking about a form of a customs union. I've covered trade policy for many, many years, and I know that trade agreements are very political in terms of their creation and how they operate. So, and the Windsor framework also kind of shows that there's many ways that you can create an agreement. So we want the government to be ambitious. We certainly want them to go further. We do think there's a lot of barriers to trade that do need to be removed. But I think there's a really good opportunity now. We've had the summit, the commitment to the summits every year, and we want to kind of engage with the government, see where we can get to, and certainly a much more positive process than we've been in the last 14 years with the previous government. And that links on to deliverables, what we'd want to see. I think it's really important, that point, that we need to see progress as soon as possible. So getting agreement on the detail, the SPS agreement, ASAP, getting the details of the agreement, the youth experience scheme as soon as possible will be really important as well, as we understand that those are things that need a mandate to be agreed by the EU. So that's where we need member states, and we're obviously working with our sister trade unions in the key member states that we think are likely to be supportive, getting them together, coordinating, getting agreement in the council as soon as possible, I think will be really important, so that we show that we're actually starting to put real concrete detail into those agreements. And then moving into other sectors, we're saying to the UK government, you don't need to wait for the SPS agreement before you move on to other sectors like chemicals. Why can't we have parallel negotiations? The summit should really be the start, but we don't need to wait for another summit before agreeing to look into other areas. So I think starting to get the detail and starting to see those changes on the ground and reduce those barriers to trade. And then we as a TUC really want to amplify any good effects. So going to some of the chemicals factories in the northeast that have been talked about and showing the real difference it's making when you don't fill out all that extra customs paperwork and you're not having that threat hanging over jobs because the profits of the businesses are being impacted. We really want to amplify that so that starts getting on the ground and influencing the debate. But I agree, we need to kind of get in there and show deliverables as soon as possible for people to actually back this project, as you say, and back the importance of it. Because our polling also shows that even in leave voting areas and even in reform majority areas, people agree it makes sense to be reducing barriers to trade with the EU and building a closer relationship. But they need to feel the positive impact of that soon to keep that support.
Anna Katarina, I'm moving to you because you've been asked a very key question about the legitimacy, but also how to move the discussion about the EU-UK relationship into the broader EU perspective. I mean, when Brexit happened, I mean, those of us who have been in Brussels have been hearing about the existential crisis of the EU as an impact of that. But following the 19th of May, nobody says the existential threat is over. Actually, we still are pondering that this partnership should help us through the tough times. So how do we, on one side, make it more, if you want, known in the public conversation? I think that there was a question about how do we make it count for the Europeans? And also following Sidonia's question, I will be coming back to that because it's always deliverables is a very difficult question, especially these days with so little being controlled. So how do we deliver on what has been promised?
All the difficulties for me, but it's okay. We will try to answer. But first of all, I think that we shouldn't see this new era as an expectation from the EU to UK or the expectation from UK to EU. Because what is the truth is that really both sides understand the gravity of the moment, and that we are living in a challenging world who is changing faster and faster. And we don't have answers alone. We should have, and to build answers all together. And that's why I think it is a very good sign to all of us to have the summit in May to strengthen the relations between UK and European Union. And for me, UK is European Union. And the first challenge that we have, we need to do better and better. And I become here again to protect our democracy. And protect our democracy is to fight against disinformation, manipulation, and all the facts that the far right, all the instruments that far right use against us, against the European project, but against also our democracies. I was in London 1 month ago with a mission on Democracy Shield Committee at the European Parliament. And you are a very good partner of European Union to help us to fight the far right all together. And to fight the far right all together is what Catherine said a few minutes ago. There are many people who has simple answers for complicated problems. You have a lot of problems in Portugal, in European Union. I don't know. And my duty is, does people feel when we give money packet, when we give health care, when we give free education, does really people feel that we are taking care of them? Because today with the manipulation and disinformation, it's not easy to have a progressist agenda. And that's my fear with the future, that's why I speak so much about our common values, is what can we do as progressists, as the Labour made, the Socialist Party in Portugal we made. But when I see that 1 year after the Socialist Party has 8 years at the government giving money, giving public services, and now I see that the far right is growing up, there are something that we need to rebuild. And that's why I don't expect more from UK than I expect from Portugal. I expect that the agreements and the step that we are running for could be stronger for all of us as citizens. That's why 3 key issues: defense and security, meaning also democracy, and also we need to have a new agenda for our citizens, and we need to bring young people for us, meaning what can we do that people can feel they are a part of this big project. So it's not easy to answer as you put the questions, but I think that we need to make more agreements like this one with the UK, but also with Canada, as we made on trade, on commercial issues. We have a lot of things to do, because I feel that if we don't live in democracy, so we will fail all as a project. Thank you.
Maggie, I see that that provoked some reaction from you, and that will be my second and the last round when I'm opening for the questions, but also comments or proposals. I know that Anna Katarina will have to excuse herself just in a moment.
I'm excusing myself, but I have another compromise, and I'm really sorry because it's in 15 minutes, so I should leave. But thank you very much for, and let me tell you that we need more forums like this one to speak a little bit more, not in a half an hour, but hours, to understand and to build a new agenda for all of us and for the new generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna Katarina. I take it as a very strong endorsement. This is our first forum. We didn't put first because this is the stepping stone, but we did hope that we are going to get enthusiastic reaction and to continue on an annual basis. But that's, of course, to be seen after the conversations will have been completed. Maggie, you've been intrigued.
My first point is actually a response to Mr. McKeish at the back about his question, because I'm a long-standing Labour Party member, and I don't think the panellists are in a position to respond to his point. From what I've seen, neither John McDonnell nor Diane Abbott are going to join any alternative party, so I think the chances of it getting off the ground are a bit low, is my personal opinion. But I have a bigger issue, which is about the far right, and the need for people in the UK and in Europe to be comfortable with multiple identities, like you said, Catherine. I went to Belfast with friends a few weeks ago, and in fact the day before the violence in Ballymena, I saw notices on lampposts saying, landlords, housing associations, we have had enough of undesirables and immigrants being placed in our communities. The time has come for locals only. The village community, this was an area of Belfast known as a particular village, must and will come first. We will protect our families at all costs. This we promise. These were commercially produced boards attached to lampposts. There will be versions of this in all sorts of different communities, funded. You know, there is money going into this, far-right money, and you may have seen similar things in Scotland, but certainly in Ireland, there's no security for migrants and immigrants communities because of that fear that's been stoked and set going by these things and by the far-right money. And that happened in Ballymena, and, you know, we saw the bonfires last week with the same kind of things on. So there is, we need a very strong kind of response to all of that for the sake of our multicultural communities that we have to protect at all costs. Thanks.
Thank you, Maggie.
Lisa Töppe. I'm an international relations student. Maybe connecting to that a little bit, how can we win back the voters that vote for the far right if there's such a strong discourse that we have public announcements happening all the time, we have increasing majorities in governments, in the parliament, so there's a very strong far right discourse, but we're talking about we have to fight against the far right. How do we do that without excluding them too much that it actually gets worse?
Thank you very much. I'm looking if there are any questions online, but I don't see the online participation to be yet very active. And I'm giving the last chances to intervene because then I will have to close this round of questions.
Thank you. My name is Gary Clark. I'm the Executive Director of the European Network of Political Foundations, but I also have another hat. I'm on the Executive Committee of the Central London Fabian Society. In terms of what I like is that the narrative has moved on. It's a constructive relationship between the UK and the EU, and during the difficult years of Brexit, I think one of the phrases I read was that we can't step into the same river twice, and I think it's very, very apt in that both the EU and the UK have changed. When it comes to collaboration within the social democratic / progressive family, what can we do more? Because it's quite clear that we have common challenges. They will look a little bit different in different European countries, but at the core we have similar issues. You mentioned the cost of living, you mentioned radicalization in communities. Aside from this event, which is extremely important, what other avenues do we have? What can we do more together?
Sam Goodman, I'm the co-chair of the New Diplomacy Project. The UK government just published its trade strategy, and in it they say that they reject the notion that they have to choose between their trading relationship with the USA, the EU, or China. Obviously, in the world that we live in, there are clear trade-offs to be made. The UK just signed a trade agreement with the US that includes a lot of deregulation. There's debate particularly around the drive to deregulate data and GDPR. I'd be interested to get the panelists' views on the trade-offs of having to choose between the three relationships and how that might interlink with the agreement that's been signed. And if I may be cheeky as well and add, I'd also be interested in the panelists' view on the broader polling in the UK at the moment, the fact that a year in Labour's polling at 23%. Any views on why that is, why the public has lost faith so quickly, how as social democrats we can re-energise the base, and any lessons that can be learnt from other social democratic parties in Europe.
Thank you very much. Those are a broad range of questions, and there's one question online which we have been trying to decipher, and I apologize to the colleagues online if we did not get the message but it would seem that there is an interest of speaking about a strategic partnership EU-UK vis-à-vis also the obligations towards other continents. Africa was mentioned directly, so that adds up to a relatively large list of questions. I think the colleagues asking questions also said that they wanted to be a little bit provocative. Knowing how fantastic the panel is, I'm sure that we are going to stand up to the challenge. And I'm wondering if Catherine or Rosa, who of you would like to start?
I was going to start and take Maggie's point and the far right reform point. I mean, this is an extremely difficult situation, and it's one that is, not new, but new in terms of campaigners dealing with this. We've not had this kind of populism before. So what can we do? First of all, we've got to tackle the misinformation. And I spoke about, door knocking and people coming to the door and telling me very, very seriously that, there are people waiting for, illegal migrants when they get off the boat and they're handed a letter with their house and their benefits. I mean, nonsense, right? And when you challenge that, you say, well, where did you hear that? Oh, I saw it on Facebook, right? And one of the other challenges is that these are algorithms that we don't even see. As progressive people, we're not shown it. So there's a whole conversation that's happening on TikTok and Facebook that we can't fight it because we can't see it. So there's tackling misinformation. There's the algorithms, and there's no easy answers. It's through conversations. We have to get out there and we have to campaign and we have to have these conversations. And voters are never wrong. We can't tell people they're wrong. What we can do is begin to unpick why they think that. And I think one thing that has caused this is there are very few community spaces anymore. After 15 years of the Tory government, local services are hollowed out. So we need to create spaces that people can get together and they can meet again, and they can start to enjoy one another's differences. I'll use Hamilton again as an example because it's the example that we've had very recently. That was a straightforward ground campaign, right? That was going, door to door. We knocked every door in the constituency. We spoke to 1 in 3 voters. I can't remember the figures of how many people we spoke to on the day, but it was pretty. It was pretty phenomenal. It was just boots on the ground. It was old-fashioned, having one-to-one conversations with people, with a local candidate that people knew and people trusted. So that's my answer on how you tackle it. But the bigger picture is you need to get money in people's pockets. People need to feel better off, and they need to feel, as Joe said, that it's not just, oh, well, we'll just try this guy who's quite funny on TikTok because everything's awful and he can't make anything worse. We also have to win the argument that he absolutely can, right? But we need to demonstrate that with positive radical change. Why are we behind in the polls? Because people are impatient. People are impatient and they want change to happen, and we haven't delivered it. We have delivered it, but we haven't delivered it fast enough, and we need to keep on, and we need to keep on going. What I would say, and I would say this because I'm a candidate, but what I would say is polling is a snapshot of what is happening now. It doesn't predict the future. So pollsters tell us what's happening, but policymakers and campaigners make that change. We were written off in Hamilton. We were told that we might even come fourth. We won. So I wouldn't worry too much about the polling just now because we've got a job to do. We've got 10 months to win in Scotland, and we've got another 3 years to turn the country around in the UK, and that's what we need to focus on. I will let Rosa deal with the trade aspects of this, if that's okay.
Thanks. Yeah, and maybe just to quickly supplement on the fighting the far right, it's just over a year since we had the awful riots across the UK, and just to say the TUC, in our response condemning those riots, said anything that divides workers, working class communities, only weakens all workers. And this is where with asylum seekers, the fact that asylum seekers in the UK do not have the right to work means they are absolutely exploitable and dependent on benefits, in fact, because they are not allowed to earn an income. So we're saying if asylum seekers had the right to work, then they wouldn't be possible to be used to undercut other workers, and that would also address concerns about potential impacts on wages and working conditions, but also to absolutely agree with that point that just been made around the need to invest in public services, in housing, so that you aren't getting these concerns and associations of asylum seekers with taking good housing. So it is about addressing those kind of fundamental socioeconomic concerns and vulnerabilities, but certainly anything that divides workers and makes one set of workers, whether it's asylum seekers or, as I say, workers from the EU on short-term visas, exploitable, is bad for UK workers as well. So that's why we're really clear in the TUC that asylum seekers' rights and migrant workers' rights are about UK workers' rights too. And the only way that we can get good standards of rights for all is to have universal workers' rights and protection for those rights and strong unions to help workers be able to claim them. So I think that's a really important part of the narrative that we're trying to get out there, and certainly with the rise of the far right, we'll need to amplify that message amongst communities. To move to the trade point, we did welcome the fact that in the trade strategy there was a support for an approach towards trade that promotes respect for ILO, International Labour Organization conventions, but as you say, it was also mentioning a number of countries, including China, where fundamental ILO conventions are not respected. And that's where we are having a discussion with government. Of course, we completely understand the need to engage with this global economy that's so significant and important and a huge investor in the UK economy, but we also should not be silent on the fact that trade and market access needs to be conditional on respect to fundamental rights. And that's, I think, an area where the UK and EU can really work together and have a lot of strength on the global stage. As I say, the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement says market access must be conditional on respect for the highest standards of rights with that level playing field clause. We haven't had that in any other trade agreement. So we want the UK government in it with its engagement with non-EU partners to be taking the same approach. It was very welcome that the UK recently suspended trade talks with Israel over its violations of international law. However, it still has a previous trade agreement with Israel that's still standing. We know the EU is now reviewing the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which is really welcome from a Europe-wide trade union perspective. This is something where we want the UK and EU to be working together to make sure that trading partners do respect fundamental labour rights and international law. And I think there's a way that we can go further, but I do think it's really important that the trade strategy flags that commitment. When it comes to the US, we said it's important that we got that agreement that reduced tariffs on steel and removed them on automotive in the UK because it took us back from the brink. But absolutely, we are alive to the concerns that would be posed from an agreement that potentially allowed for data to be misused, workers' data to be misused, potentially lowered digital services tax and other areas. So we are very alive to potential detail and engaging with the government on them. And then just finally to the question around Africa, I think this is another area where UK and EU could work together in the context of the World Trade Organization with the coalition of willing other key countries. I agree, Canada, Australia, some others where you also have progressive governments in place. We want global trade rules to be reformed to allow countries to be able to promote and develop green industries, because currently the global trade rules really restrict the ability for governments, particularly in the global south, to promote industries without being accused of unfair subsidies. And this is something where trade unions globally are really pushing for reform. And it's something where, again, we want the commitments to fundamental labour rights underpinning any form of increased market access. So I think this is something where we could have a very positive contribution, UK working with the EU in terms of global South partners as well, but it does take that commitment to be working globally and on partnership around a rights-based agenda towards global trade.
Thank you very much indeed. I have the absolutely ungrateful duty to say that we've exhausted the time that has been foreseen for this debate. But I think there are several lessons, and I'm so grateful to the panelists, the keynote, but also to all of you who have pointed the questions we should be busy with, not only today, tomorrow during the closed-door seminar, but also in the future, because as I understand different speakers, you have encouraged us to pursue the path that we started today and think about similar forums to enhance the discussion. I think it was quite interesting how we went from the discussion about what was named a transactional relationship built in the times of need to a question of common and mutual responsibility and cooperation. I think that that has been the lesson that many of you named as something that, especially from the progressive point of view, would be a distinctive characteristic of the new relationship. I think from reserved and being reserved for different reasons, we went to the question how to restore, rebuild, and move on. And here the deliverables sounded very much in the conversation, because we know that the clock is ticking. The big announcement has been made. It has been said that it's for the people and with people putting it first. But of course, the question that you've tried to tackle while saying why is it so difficult for people to believe and not to disbelieve has been at the center of the conversation. And last but not least, I think that this conversation has also been for us, and we have been at FEPS working very much on the EU-UK relationship for a very long time in the different contexts. There have been some issues that we have further work on. Northern Ireland has been mentioned, the Windsor Framework Agreement. You can find the publication. That's my commercial break at the moment outside of this room. But I think it has been quite important to see how from things that have been very tough to discuss, we move to a discussion how this could be a vehicle for the much needed transformation. And with that, I'd like to thank very much first and foremost all of you, because while we have been having a full room, and I really apologize to the colleagues who had to stand to be part in this conversation, which is a sign also of the enthusiasm, and we take it very humbly that you stayed with us throughout this very hot evening, standing to hear all that speakers had to say in this debate, but also many joining us online. Thank you so much for doing so on the 14th of July, very unlikely day to have any political debate really. I think that everyone is looking for the recess and the end of the political terms, but we thought that that was the point final that we needed definitely to put in here. I'd like to thank very much the FES offices, FES in Brussels. I saw Tobias sitting and hiding in the back, but also Sidonia, Daniela and Edda for fantastic cooperation. The FES office in London, Michelle is here also hiding in the second row, but thanks so much. It's been years of discussing the new opening, and it's so thrilling to see the new opening hopefully happening, and us being at the position to have the conversation. And last but not least, I would like to thank wholeheartedly the FEPS team, starting from Celine and Louise, who have been welcoming you, but also our fantastic communication team, Rodrigo, Ifa and Morgana. Thanks to them, the event was broadcasted. There was no glitch, has been hearable all across Europe and hopefully beyond, and has been immortalized in fantastic social media coverage that has been to follow. So hopefully you can find yourself on our social media as well. And with that, I'm sure that there is a hunger for something to eat, but hunger for further debate. And with that, I'd like to thank you so much and invite you to stay with us for a little reception that is going to follow this fantastic conversation. Thank you so much.